Hey everyone, it's Mark. Real quick up top, I just want to do a heads up for this video today. Recently, I had the opportunity to interview a couple of therapists about their work using TTRPGs as a group therapy tool. It's a really fun conversation. I had a great time. I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with you, and I hope you learn a lot as well. I do want to do a couple of quick heads up. Number one, take care of yourself. And number two, remember that mental health is a serious issue. So, in this interview, we do not dive into anything too heavy or serious. The conversation is pretty light and a lot of fun, but I realize that any conversation around mental health has the potential to be heavy for people who might be listening. And if you need to take a break, that's perfectly okay. Please take care of yourself. And the second thing I want to say is please understand that this video is being done in support of mental health. In fact, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we wanted to help bring light to that and encourage people who might need help to seek help. So even though we're laughing and having a good time, please understand that this video is done in support of and encouragement for those who might be seeking help. And I believe that you can have very serious and powerful conversations and laugh and have a good time at the same moment. Whether you're someone who is looking for help, whether you're someone who is actively going to therapy right now, whether you're someone who maybe has graduated from therapy, or even if you're just someone who's interested in this topic, please know that I love you and I support you and I wish the best for you. I enjoy watching the Dr. John Deloney show, and one of the things that he says is, "You are worth being well." And I want you all to take that encouragement today. I hope you all learned something. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And more than that, I hope you take care of yourself and truly have a wonderful day. But with all of that in mind, let's talk about TTRPGs as a therapy tool on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who is talking to a couple of therapists today, and my players are hoping that after this video, I'll be a much nicer game master. It probably won't work, but I don't want to crush their dreams yet. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And today, I'm going to be doing a special interview in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month. We're going to be talking about TTRPGs as a therapy tool. Now, before I dive into that, let me get all the YouTube stuff out of the way really quick. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and share it. Subscribe to the channel. You can check out my Discord and my Patreon. All that stuff will be in the video description. But the most important thing you can do is join in and be a part of the conversation. And today's video is a great example of that because today's video was actually suggested by one of the members of my Discord community. And they're going to be making an appearance here in a minute, but they actually reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in talking about TTRPGs being used as a therapy tool. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you know that I do chaplaincy and pastoral care in my in real life job. So while I am not a therapist, I am often part of care teams and support groups and things like that. And I've done many references for therapy and what have you in the past. So I have been adjacent to the mental health care community for a large portion of my professional career. And I have a great deal of respect for the work that they do. And one of the things I've seen in recent years is that many people inside of the mental health care field have started using TTRPGs as a therapy tool. And just being honest, I thought that was incredibly cool. So when one of my community reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do a video on this?" I was all on board for that. So let's go ahead and do the introductions for this video, starting with the very person who suggested it. Garreth, would you care to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Garreth, they, them pronouns, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist dash associate, which just means I'm new to the field. I recently graduated in the pandemic, and I own and operate Roll for Growth, which is my D&D slash Pathfinder group therapy and support group network that's all virtual, all online.
And then our second guest today is Julia. So, Julia, would you care to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm Julia Stamman. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Austin, Texas. I'm from Austin, and my private practice is called Heart of the Realm. And I see individual folks as well as run D&D therapy groups.
So, I was speaking with Garreth before this video, and I've discovered that I apparently have a large fan base in Texas. So, I might know where I need to take some future vacations so I can meet up with people. But it is wonderful having you both here today. So, in any kind of interview scenario, it's important to establish credentials, and the most important credentials here is gamer cred. So, really quick, I would like to ask you all, how long have you been playing TTRPGs, and what are some of your favorite games? Julia, would you like to answer first?
Sure. So I've been playing D&D since 2009, and I really like favorite TTRPG
Mm-hmm.
games. Or okay,
Yeah.
um, Dungeons and Dragons is my go-to. I play in a personal game weekly, as well as anywhere from 2 to 3 groups a week professionally. So it's kind of my bread and butter. But I've also really enjoyed other kind of looser type TTRPGs like Fiasco,
Mm-hmm.
Kids on Bikes. Um, those are probably my favorite that I've played so far. Mothership was fun to kind of do like a Halloween sort of sci-fi horror type of game.
Mm-hmm. It has been a few years since I got to play Fiasco, but that is a very entertaining system. Now, in your personal game, are you a player or are you the game master? Just out of curiosity.
Just player. I could not. I was running a Curse of Strahd game for my friends for a little while there, and then it was like, okay, well, let's do once a month, and let's do every other month, and no, I really can't do this
Mm-hmm.
also at the same time. Maybe at some point, if I can scale back my professional games, I could pick up Curse of Strahd again, but it was becoming too much. So I relish in just being able to be a player and
Mm-hmm.
sit back and be goofy and not have to think about those things.
All right. And Garreth, same question over to you. How long have you been playing TTRPGs, and what are some of your favorite games?
So I started playing D&D 3.5 in 2005,
Mm-hmm.
so not quite 20 years now. I got thrown to the wolves and I started out DMing before I was ever a player. And as far as a lot of my favorite systems, I love the Pathfinder system. I
Mm-hmm.
like D&D 5th edition. One of my favorites that's smaller is Coyote and Crow, which was a really successful Kickstarter that just became available to everybody now. And it's a futuristic setting if the Americas were never colonized. And
Okay.
so it's really awesome.
I have not heard of that one, but I may have to check that one out because that's a new game you put on my radar. All right.
I actually backed that, and it's like on my shelf behind my screen. I'm like looking at it. I'm like, I'm gonna get to you. I'm really excited to read through it.
All right. So the next question I have for you all is, what is your favorite class to play in an RPG, or maybe if it's not a game that has classes, what is your favorite character archetype? And Garreth, I'll let you take the answer first.
So, stereotypically for a therapist, I typically play a cleric. The healer role runs deep for me. I'm actually playing in the Abomination Bolts from Pathfinder right now, and I'm playing a cleric. But hey, Undead campaign, I'm actually the nuke. So, other than that, I really like support roles in general because I feel like it gives me a lot of freedom to try different things. So I also really like playing alchemists.
When you said cleric, you made me think of one of my friends who is a hospital chaplain. And the very first time they tried Dungeons and Dragons, they went straight for cleric. And I was just like, art's imitating life on this one. Julia, for you?
Yeah, just to comment on that, I've joked with making a character sheet for a therapist before, like a stereotypical therapist, and it definitely clear. Um, Surprisingly, I don't gravitate towards cleric or paladin or anything like that. My friends always joke I always do rogue,
Mm-hmm.
and even when I do something like play a bard, I play it as a rogue. Uh, so for some reason, I like hanging back and sneaking and
Mm-hmm.
being more strategic about how I'm playing encounters versus just jumping in. Although sometimes that can be really cathartic. I've definitely played a fighter before that was just like, yes, smash. I don't have to think. But I really like the idea of being useful, but like behind the scenes. And I think some could argue that that would be sort of a therapist
Mm-hmm.
archetype as well, like being sneaky about like unveiling emotions and things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
I was just thinking, I'm learning so much about you as a therapist right now.
I've usually seen that people go one of two directions. Either their characters become a very strong reflection of their in real life, or they become kind of the extreme opposite. I am notorious for playing wizards and barbarians, and people often are like, "What's the connecting line between those two classes?" And the answer is neither of them are subtle. Because
Mm.
in life, I'm a very reserved person, and I tend to hold back and be quiet, listen, take your time. And on the rare occasions I'm actually a player, I'm like, okay, we're going all in. There is no time for subtlety. Let's get this done. All right. So this next segment that we're going to do for this interview, I'm going to call the power of stories. And the reason I kind of chose to take the interview this direction is I think that one of the reasons that TTRPGs is gaining so much popularity is because of its capacity, well, trying to think of the right way to say this, because of the shared story aspect of the game. And I think the ability to build your own story, build a story with your friends is just what makes this hobby so special. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how TTRPGs have impacted us, some of the ways that they've benefited us over the years. And I shared with you all a little bit when we were kind of planning for this video. When I was growing up, I was something of an oddball in my family because I came from just a very blue collar family. And not to disparage my family, they're wonderful people, but I swear I was born in an academic chair. I've always had a very scholarly bent, which was very at odds with the way my family was. And so when I was growing up, I really didn't have anyone to kind of role model, like, this is where you can go, this is what you can do. And I was just trying to figure things out on my own. And in middle school, me and one of my friends invented our own Star Wars game. We wanted to be Star Wars characters. The only thing I knew was to create some version of myself, so I created a character named Jason Orlando Hawk and started playing him as a Star Wars character. And what I eventually realized over the years as I played that character is I was creating a heroic persona of myself. And basically I was saying, this is who I want to be, this is what I want to do. And I kind of built a role model for myself so that when I became an adult, I had some idea of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And it's just kind of strange to me looking back, like TTRPGs kind of helped me figure out this is where I want to go in life. And I think that's a good example of the power that a story can have, that it can help you think and shape different aspects of who you are or what you do. So I was kind of wondering, have either of you had an experience like that where this hobby has been a benefit to you? Garreth, want to go first?
Sure, I'll think of something off the spot. Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, I started out being the game master. And growing up, I was a very reserved, very shy person. And all of a sudden, I was being looked to as the person who was running everything and the person who was supposed to know all the rules. And one of my best friends, bless him, decided to run a druid in my first game, which was actually a Strahd game,
Mm-hmm.
who had an animal companion who grappled in 3.5. And I found that out on the first session. And so after that, I've actually had a lot more confidence because I'm like, oh, hey, look, I can work with myself to figure out, like, if I don't know what to do, how do I handle that situation versus just freezing up and getting really upset at myself.
As someone who played 3.5 extensively, you have my sympathy on that one. Julia, do you have a story you could share?
Yeah. So I started as a player. My friend was the one that kind of got our whole friend circle into it, and I didn't know, I wasn't sure about it. I was pretty hesitant. It seemed like a lot of rules and everything like that. But I wanted to hang out with my friends, and so I was like, okay, I'll learn the rules and give it a shot. I too was really shy growing up, and it was really hard to get me to speak up in general in pretty much any situation. And so to become a character and do a voice and role play was super intimidating to me. And probably in that first year or so, I was barely role playing. But I started to slowly develop confidence in doing that. And it wasn't a official goal that I set for myself, like as if I was in therapy and was working towards like a treatment plan for that. But it was just motivating to be with my friends and have as much fun as they were having, and wanting to jump in and having that desire to do that is just inherently motivating to learn to speak up and to be less shy in those situations, and to be creative, which I was like kind of on my own. And so to be creative in that collaborative space was really energizing, and I think it just did a lot of good for me overall. That to be able to do this professionally now, I couldn't have done that. I mean, literally for not being introduced to the game, right? But also the skills that it takes to think on your feet, like Garreth was talking about, and to um, as a DM do a lot of different voices and a lot of different characters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been super beneficial for me personally growing up with that.
I can definitely respect that. You all may find this hard to believe, but there are friends who knew me in high school who would swear that I did not speak when I was in high school. That's how shy I was. So I can definitely appreciate RPGs as a place to help find your voice. So, all right. We're going to move into talking about TTRPGs as a therapy tool now. And Garreth, since you were the one who kind of pitched this video idea, I'm going to let you take the first question. When did you discover TTRPGs as a therapy tool, and can you share a little bit about the history of this particular therapy technique?
Okay. So I started my master's program 2018, and I found out something called narrative therapy.
Mhm.
And I'm already a storyteller, and I'm like, hey, that sounds great. And so going down that rabbit hole and exploring that a lot, I found out people were starting to use games. And a really important part of narrative therapy is being able to kind of see the story and, pick out your role. That suspension of disbelief that you have in an RPG.
Mhm.
And I have found personally that adults really struggle with that. It feels really weird at first.
Mhm.
But all of a sudden, when you're playing a game, it doesn't feel as bad anymore. And so I reached out to an organization called Games to Grow, based up in Seattle. And one of their trainings is actually where I met Julia. And, we're getting specialty training on how to just do this better and figure out more ways that we can be helpful for people. And they're a really awesome organization. They run groups and they have trainings for therapists. And thankfully, they made it really easy for me because they have an entire page of research on RPGs in therapy. And so looking it over, it seems like the first research base for like therapy
Mm-hmm.
officially using it was actually using sci-fi novels and fantasy novels as a way of relating to characters and kind of building up that persona.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to 1966. So that
Okay.
actually predates D&D. And so I thought that was really cool. And since probably the 2010s, a lot of research has started to be picked up. I think the everything happening with Critical Role and D&D 5th edition really getting out there and being more public.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's going to be a huge spike in research after this pandemic because everybody started offering this online, which makes it more accessible to more
Mm-hmm.
people too. So it's still relatively new in our field,
Mm-hmm.
but I know Julia and I have a lot of experience personally that we can, show, hey, this is how we've seen this work for a lot of people, even if the research is still developing.
I do think that this is an exciting area of research. When I first started hearing about this, I have a friend who is a therapist for children, and they don't do TTRPGs, but they do other games as therapy tools. And I was just like, that makes sense. I can see the utility of that. And, I was kind of surprised that it wasn't more prominent because it's just like, hey, this is a really good idea. But Julia, what's kind of your experience with games to grow? You said, is that right?
Game to Grow, yeah. They were definitely the first organization that I found when I started doing research on it too. My own story was that I was working with my supervisor at the time who was like, you can work with whoever you want. And I was like, whoever I want? What? Is that real? And she was like, yeah, I mean, who are you just like naturally drawn to in your personal life? And I was like, well, definitely like gamers and like geek types and like artists and creatives and things like that. She's like, there it is, and I was just like, I can't believe this is real. And so I was just starting to look up like gamer therapy
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And I found Game to Grow and my just Google research. And I found that they were doing D&D therapy groups. And I was like, this immediately makes so much sense. It's just intuitive based on the personal growth that I've gone through with games and the power of storytelling in general. It doesn't have to, have the label of therapy in front of it. So yeah, I started doing that and kind of did some consults with them and things like that. And now they've got really great trainings out there. Yeah.
All right. All right. So for my next question, and Julia, I'll kind of throw this one to you. When it comes to TTRPG therapy sessions, how do you structure those? How do you go about setting them up? What are kind of the important elements to preparing for that?
Yeah. So my actual structures are 2-hour sessions, and we always start with a check in. I have folks create their own icebreakers, and so we just kind of start off with some questions. It can be about your character or out of character. And then the bulk of the 2 hours is gameplay. And then we spend at least 30 minutes at the end processing what happened in the session out of character. So it can be, what happened in the session in the here and now and sort of like those group dynamics, or it can be, hey, this thing in game really reminded me of something that's happening in real life for me, or it's bringing up this, mental struggle that I'm dealing with in my real life. And so that's when it kind of looks a little bit more like a traditional talk therapy
Mm-hmm.
group. But the themes in the campaign, the way that I do it anyway, I know folks do it different ways, but I work with adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so the themes in the therapy campaign are mental health themes.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's like anxiety, there's like anxiety themes. If it's depression, there are depression themes.
Okay.
So it kind of gives a little bit more grits for the mill.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really encourage folks to think about what do they want to get out of the group, and how can you put that into your character creation. So if somebody's wanting to work on confidence, then
Mm-hmm.
maybe you are playing a really high charismatic character.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you're playing a really low charisma character, actually, and it's part of your individual story arc that you develop that confidence throughout the gameplay. So those are a few different ways that I try to like weave into the therapy in the group. But I also really do believe that D&D is therapeutic on its own.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is one area, Julia, where you and I differ a little bit, because you run more traditional like therapy groups, and I run more of support groups, which are only 90 minutes. So my sessions are shorter, and we don't necessarily process as much. But a lot of it is because the population I'm looking for is really just looking for a place to belong. Like I work a lot with autistic and ADHD adults, and they're looking for a safe way to just engage in, finding other people. A lot of adults I work with really struggle on how do I find friends as an adult? Well, here's a great way that you can practice finding friends, and then you can go out into the world and find other game groups or have some confidence that you maybe didn't have before to be like, hey, you seem cool. Do you want to play a game?
Yeah, that's one of the sort of passive benefits that we talk about is maybe they didn't know D&D or Pathfinder or whatever they're playing beforehand, and now they do. And so that's almost this, I don't know what you call it, like a pathway towards developing new friendships and being in different social situations, learning the game.
I think it could give a kind of a connection point. When you don't know someone at all, but you know that you share an interest, that gives you a very natural point for getting to know that person. All right. So I know y'all kind of hit this question a little bit, but we'll dive a little bit deeper into it. What are some of the similarities and differences between a TTRPG therapy session and just a regular TTRPG game? And Garreth, I'll let you take this one first.
So, number one thing that's different that we have to get out of the way is you're paying for it, because you are there for some kind of therapeutic benefit. And so while, character creation and a lot of the party dynamics and the form of the session itself may be really similar to a lot of what people would play with their friends, at least for my personal experience, I really talk to people about their player goals. Not even so much character goals, but like Julia said, what are you hoping to get out of this experience? And then how can we work together to get that into the game? And so one thing that I do is our first session isn't actually even character based necessarily. It's world building together. I put down on a whiteboard my, starting town, which is typically Sandpoint because I've played so much Pathfinder in that town. And then all of the players build the world around it. And part of that is setting up rumors and adventure hooks. And so we kind of build the world together so everybody feels more invested. And at least in my experience, I haven't found a DM personally that does that kind of a thing. They typically have a story in mind. And the other big thing that's different in my experience is hitting the pause button on a session when something really intense is happening and having that freedom to dive into talking about that if somebody is having a reaction. I was thinking about this leading up to this, and we all know the one player who plays chaotic neutral and does stuff because my character would. It's a trope now. And I was thinking about if somebody came into a therapy group like that, it actually presents us a lot of opportunity to not only find out, hey, what's the motivation for you in playing this kind of character, but also how do we manage everybody else's frustrations at that in a way where we can still collaborate together.
Yeah, that's a huge part of running this as a therapist. Is I've been a part of games where the DM, understandably so, but did not have any kind of interpersonal conflict resolution strategies, shall we say. And it's really frustrating because it just keeps going and the conflict isn't resolved, or it's you try to resolve it in this way that's actually more harmful. So that is a huge one that I think anybody that's coming in with D&D or TTRPG experience could probably relate to is,
Mm-hmm.
man, I wish my DM would do something about this. I wish they would take care of this. I wish they would take the lead in resolving this. So I think that in itself can be really therapeutic and get into the group dynamics of things. Another part that it's therapeutic, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here. Another part that is therapeutic is your intentionality
Mm-hmm.
of what you're putting into the story and the
Mm-hmm.
gameplay. So if you're prepping ahead of time, I'm thinking about what are some of the things that folks are dealing with and how can I write that into the story, so that they're not overwhelmed, like flooded by the
Mm-hmm.
content, which is an important note, but that it's getting them to think about things. So different dynamics. I mean, spoiler if you ever play one of my games, but one of the things that happens in a scene, for example, is you like come upon these historical markers inside somebody's mind, and they are like representative of like interest loss and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of a tie into depression. Um, but then you play through that and however they want to, and then at the end, one of the processing questions might be like, what would your historical markers be inside of your own mind? You as Mark or you as Garrett, like what are those historical markers that somebody would find if we were to go inside of your mind? So it almost becomes this like reflection, prompty,
Mm-hmm.
journaly kind of questions of just like exploring deeper and further into like using the story to open up some of those reflection points. If that makes sense.
Hmm. I think a big part of it for us as therapists is kind of just planting the seeds
Mm-hmm.
and allowing our players, our clients to go, the next week and think about those things. Like Julia said, with like reflection questions of like, hey, like this is a fun game, but also this really big thing came up for me. And how do I feel about that?
Mm-hmm. My brain is going off on a tangent on the conflict resolution that you all were mentioning, because I do feel like that's almost a gamer trope. Um, and so, some of my favorite content creators I enjoy watching because they talk about how to do conflict resolution inside of a gaming group and stuff like that. And so I'm like, do I need to sign up my player? No. But I do think that I can see the utility in that. One of the things I've seen in a lot of modern RPGs, and I think like even Pathfinder talks about this a little bit, is having something that the group can do to call a break if it's needed for a game session. And whether it's like a card that people can touch or a phrase that somebody can say, just something that like if someone at the table is getting uncomfortable, you can pause the game and let them process that. And I think that's an interesting example of mental health affecting the hobby. So I thought that was very interesting personally.
I have a thought about that. So something that if there are any, just casual DMs tuning in, you can definitely talk to your players about that and use like an X card system,
Mm-hmm.
or the like consent RPG list
Mm-hmm.
is one that I use. And so it just has a list of topics, and folks can categorize them as sort of like red, yellow, or green.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want this in the game? Do I not want this in the game? And get on the same page about that. So that's like beforehand, but then the X card would be during. So
Mm-hmm.
like you were talking about, Mark, it would be that pause. And so what I'll do is we'll talk about, do we want to skip over this content? Do we want to kind of fast forward? Do we want to rewind and say that it never happened?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of giving them some options as far as what was really tough about this or flooding about this, and how can we like continue the story so that it doesn't totally derail everything, because that might make that person feel worse and guilty,
Mm-hmm.
for like
Hmm.
stopping the game. But how can we like kind of move through it, but with an intentionality, so that we're not flooding
Mm-hmm.
folks that are getting flooded.
So the next question that I had, and I will admit this one is mostly in here from to satisfy my own personal curiosity, um, and that is, I know that in therapy and in mental health care that a lot of different tools and techniques get used. what works for one person might not work as well for the next, and vice versa, that kind of thing. And so I'm just kind of curious, are there situations or circumstances where TTRPGs are ideal as a therapy tool or particularly effective? Like, what are the situations where this particular approach to therapy seems very beneficial? And Julia, I'll let you take the first shot.
I would almost strip away the TTRPG thing
Mhm.
and think just what situations are group therapy
Mhm.
beneficial, which is anybody that's having any kind of challenges with relationships.
Mhm.
So everybody pretty much. But like, I mean, it's a really common human experience, right?
Mhm.
To be, working through those challenges in whatever way that they show up. Group therapy is great for that because when it's one-on-one individual counseling, you just don't get that same sort of real world experience of what that relationship is. But in groups,
Mhm.
they're normal people coming in, talking to each other.
Mhm.
The things that you're having trouble with in your personal life are going to come in to play in that group. So anybody that's having any kinds of boundaries or communication or um, independence versus dependence, or like the list goes on in terms of relationships, that's great. And then somebody that's interested in gaming and TTRPGs
Mhm.
and that particular um, game that you are running, whether it's Pathfinder, D&D, or Kids on Bikes is a big one. Um, so bringing that in as like that starting point, I think we were kind of talking about that earlier. It's a common interest that that it's interesting, and you're like, what is this? And I think for some folks, it's less scary to join a group therapy situation in general if they know
Mhm.
that you're playing D&D, because talk therapy groups can often be like, folks
Mhm.
are like, no, that's not for me. I don't want to do that. That's too scary.
Mhm.
So it kind of like eases some of the fear there.
I can see that as someone who has made referrals to therapy and stuff over the years. Often there is kind of this hesitation with the word therapy that honestly shouldn't be there. But just people will get hung up on the word therapy. But and you look for ways to kind of ease it in where it doesn't feel so heavy to the person. And I do see where that would be a huge benefit of, okay, do you want to play a game that can maybe help with this? And I do think that that could kind of lower that step and make it an easier first step for someone who is looking for something to help them.
Yeah, I know that, Mark, you mentioned that you have a friend who does therapy with children and uses other kinds of games.
Mm-hmm.
And something that Julia and I have talked about that I'm really excited to bring to this experience is working with families.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially families with teenagers, there's a lot of dynamics changing constantly in that family,
Mm-hmm.
where there's power struggles and there's independence happening.
Mm-hmm.
And when we move that to an RPG world, it becomes more okay for people to be like, hey, you're taking the lead right now because it makes sense to let our ranger lead us through the swamp,
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, no, I'm the fighter and I'm going to lead everywhere. And it also makes consequences, we're more able to talk about it without it being as serious that way too.
And that kind of leads into the bonus question that I didn't tell you all about before today. Um, I was also kind of curious, and just sorry I forgot to send you all this question earlier. Um, I was kind of curious about how the group dynamic modifies modifies this as a therapy tool, because I know a lot of my experience in being in therapy has been the one-on-one relationship with the therapist, but the TTRPG session is going to be by nature a group event, and so I was wondering, how does that group dynamic affect the process?
I'm going to let you take the lead here because you've been doing this slightly longer than I have.
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, the group dynamic is such the heart of how the group is going to go and what people in a given group. I run mine for 12 weeks, so in that 12-week session, it's the heart of what they're going to get out of that group. if the cohesion is right, then people are going to get a lot more out of that group. And it's not just like the classes that they play and do they have a balanced party. I mean, that's nice, but honestly, if it's not balanced, it just brings up a different set of things that we can kind of talk about and different encounters that we can do. But it's more of the personalities of folks coming in, and if they've been in group therapy before, honestly, is a big deal, because they're if you have some experienced folks, they're like, okay, I know the deal. It's almost like its own culture
Mm-hmm.
of how do you interact and how do you challenge each other and process through things. um, so there are those aspects. Those are big in terms of group dynamics, and it's tough, putting together a group, knowing how people are going to interact. You just kind of can't know for
Mm-hmm.
sure, but you can try to put together a nice group,
Mm-hmm.
where they'll kind of balance each other out, have some similarities, but also have some differences. Because if you're all too similar, then there's like that group think of like, oh, we are all on the same page, and we're not going to challenge each other. And
Mm-hmm.
um, so it's so much a part of how successful the group is going to be, in my opinion.
And I think like with group therapy and D&D and Pathfinder collaborating together, one thing that we see as therapists is that finding that balance, we're going to try and get it around where what's workable. We're not going
Mm-hmm.
to pair people where they're going to be so conflictual. But then we get to model how to balance a lot of this out too with
Mm-hmm.
players, where maybe you have one player who really, really likes to RP and one player who's really about math and dice rolls.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we get to kind of show how we can be friendly and be nice with people who are very different from us,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can help that group dynamic form where it's safe for everybody there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a strength in that diversity too, because you can have that person that likes math to help you out as the DM, and have the person that likes to RP speak up or be the face of the
Mm-hmm.
party when that person that likes math but doesn't like RP is like, are you asking me to talk in character right now? Just like the deer in the headlights look. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that, yeah, they when they can balance each other out, that builds confidence too, because then you're like, hey, I bring something to this party, I bring something
Mm-hmm.
to this group that's needed, and that they need me and want me to be there, and that
Mm-hmm.
feels really good.
I think one of the best things about TTRPGs, just as a hobby, is the benefit of the group and benefit for the group, just that you kind of instinctively get. You know, when I play a TTRPG, I am part of a team, and that's the assumption from the word go. And I know that I need my team if I'm going to be successful, and I also know my team needs me. And I do think that that is a very healthy thing, just that the hobby kind of naturally accomplishes.
Totally, it gets into that sense of belonging, that
Mm-hmm.
you are part of something. Not to sound too dramatic about
Mm-hmm.
that, but yeah, I think that's really important. And the consistency too. I hear that a lot from folks, that their groups fizzled in casual games, or they weren't meeting regularly, or people were dropping out and coming back, and
Mm-hmm.
all these things. So even just that consistency of like coming week to week and having the structure there can be really uh, healing in some ways as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think also like, because I know people who have had bad experiences trying to find groups to play with, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they were just very, very different from everybody else, like Julia said, too different.
Mm-hmm.
And so like coming into the therapy setting, if this is something you really want to explore, you know that you have at least one person in your corner, and that person is the person who's running the session.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a specialty as therapists that we offer, where a traditional game master, they're trying to balance everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but we really have specialized training in how to help everybody, get balanced and find that for themselves.
I think a lot of groups would love to have a therapist helping them with group dynamics before the campaign begins. Okay, so the last question that I have written down on just TTRPGs as a therapy tool is the where can we learn more question. For maybe someone who is looking for therapy or looking for some help with an issue, and they think that this might be the right thing for them. Where could they find one of these games, or more information about them, or alternatively, if there is a therapist that's watching this who might be interested in kind of adding this to their toolkit, where could they learn more? And Gareth, can you take the lead?
Sure. So I already talked about Game to Grow in Seattle. They have a lot of really great online resources. I think that they run some digital online groups for out of state people as well. It's always one of those struggles as therapists that we're constrained within our state boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And also for therapists, there's Geek Therapeutics, which offers a lot of training classes. And they also have, for people who go through their certification, for clients or for players who are looking to do this, they have a search tool to find them.
Okay.
And that's the tough part, is because this is so relatively new to our field, at least as far as I know, there's not a go-to list for where to find these games.
Mm-hmm.
And so sites that I recommend for people who are looking to try and find a group like this or interested in group therapy after listening to this is Therapy Den and Psychology Today. Both of them have therapists who list their group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
They're both, free resources for people to reach out and find people either in their area or in their state. If you live in something as large as Texas, I think there's about 4 hours difference between Julia and I as far as where we live, and we're not even across the state from each other. And so, it's one of those things where it's going to be maybe harder to find it. I've started working with a lot of my local gaming stores to have that resource available. And so if you're in the Dallas area, you might see some flyers or something like that, and talking to people about if they know anything going on for that.
Yeah, I would recommend the same resources. Honestly, Google search, if you want to try, I guess, TTRPG therapy group or D&D therapy group, or you can also look at maybe, like, for example, Austin group offerings, or like Austin group therapy groups, like, I don't want to list out search terms that you can use, but trying to kind of do some digging. I know algorithms aren't always super kind to us, but trying to do some digging into that, or asking a therapist in your local area what resources they know of, especially if they seem to lean geeky or anything like that. They might have heard of some different things. Usually when folks hear about it, they remember it because it's kind of unique. Those would be my recommendations.
So I think we can all agree we need more therapists who are also geeks.
Openly geeky, anyway.
All right. So that kind of covers the end of the questions that I had about TTRPGs as a therapy tool. But just as an open-ended question to both of you, is there anything else kind of in this topic or in this realm that I didn't think to ask of that you'd like to bring attention to?
I would say if you find somebody who's offering these kinds of groups,
Mm-hmm.
and when you first reach out to contact that therapist, feel free to say if you have very specific concerns or if you're looking to work with a very certain issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like how we work with depression may be very different than how we work with anxiety. And for me, since I work a lot with neurodivergent folks, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a big factor in who I put together in a group too.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can be open about, like, hey, I saw that you're running this, can you have more information? Or if you have specific questions, feel free to ask. If we don't have the answer, we're probably going to try and find it for you.
Yeah, I think it makes me think of, all of these types of games are collaborative by nature. And so you are going to get what you put in, but also it's like, I would hope that folks can see that as a really cool thing and an exciting thing, that you get to really help write that story of what happens in the game and in character. So I wonder if it would arguably be something that you have more say in, like what happens in the group, more so than other like talk therapy sort of situations. Um, so feel free to bring your creativity to it, and that's one of my favorite parts. Is I do consults with folks, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to plant the seed for you to start thinking about how can you challenge yourself through your character creation based on what you're bringing in, blah blah blah, and then session 0, and then the first session when they have their characters solidified, I'm always just like so excited because the ideas that they come up with are so cool, and I could never have come up with them on my own, like NPCs or anything like that. And so I'm inspired by the folks that come in and bring in their ideas and their stories and their creativity every single time, and every single time is different, and I think they inspire each other too. So that's just a really neat benefit of running these groups for me, is to like witness that power of storytelling. It's like watching this movie that's really moving and you start crying because it's just getting to you in that way. But that's like happening on the therapy level, so it's really cool.
Yeah, it's always really interesting for us, I think, as therapists, when we get towards the end of a season, because Julia and I both do 12-week sessions, and we find somebody grew in a way that no one there expected them to grow. And, towards the end, they're like, oh, I didn't even realize that this was challenging to me. And now I have this new tool, or I have this new ability in myself.
Yeah, or they'll like, so sometimes part of my checkout questions is like, what metaphors or symbolism did you pick up on today? And of course they come up with like so much more than I even intended, and the things that they come up with are really cool. And it's like art in that way, where it has a different interpretation. So people are like, oh, it was definitely about this, it definitely signified that. I'm like, like I didn't mean to do that, but that's really cool. And then they'll just take that and run with it in their individual arcs. And it's really cool.
I know as a storyteller, when my players engage with the story, that is always very rewarding to me. And so I would imagine for groups that are doing these kinds of games that seeing people engage with the story and seeing people learn about themselves and grow, I imagine that would be an amazing thing. So um, uh, thank you all for sharing that. I want to close out not on TTRPGs as a therapy tool, but just on the subject of mental health. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. And part of the reason that I agreed to do this video, part of the reason that Garreth reached out to me is, mental health is a serious issue. And I think especially the last couple of years with the pandemic and all of the stresses that have been with that, that a lot of people are waking up to how important it is to take care of that part of yourself. And so I wanted to kind of close on this idea of, if there is someone out there who is listening to this and is thinking about going to therapy for the first time, whether it's the traditional one-on-one therapy, whether it's a group therapy session or TTRPG therapy session, whatever it may be, you know, um, what steps should a person take to get started in looking in therapy? And I guess even more important than that, what should a person look for in a therapist so that they can get the most help, if you will? And Julia, I'll let you tackle this question first.
What a question. Um, let's see. As far as what to look for in a therapist, I think that's so individual. Um, but if you are using one of the directories like Therapy Den or Psychology Today, they have lots of filters, so you can really filter down your search, not just based on an area, which it will have to be in your state that you're living in if you're in the United States. But also just like some of the theories that they might use, or even their gender, or different kinds of identities you might be able to filter by, like Garreth was saying, if they're also neurodivergent or and if that's important to you, those kinds of things. I think that probably the best thing that you can do is read their profile, or if they have a video, a lot of therapists have video, little intro videos, and just like check in with yourself to see how you feel about the way that they're talking and just how they are as a person and like in the room, so to speak. If you have that privilege to be able to do that, a lot of the times folks are just going based on who's on their insurance or sliding scale, like really low cost services. And sometimes you're just kind of paired with people if it's like a big group directory like that. Um, Garrett, do you want to piggyback?
Sure. I mean, like, I know some things that I tell people to look for when they're looking for a therapist is check and see if they have free like consultations or intakes so that you can have a time to ask questions that you have. You know, if you're looking for coming in and working on something specific like identity, ask if the therapist has, you know, experience working with those issues. And also those free consultations, I know as a therapist, it always gives me an idea of whether or not our personalities and my way of working is going to mesh with somebody. Because I have a very free flow way of working that doesn't work really well for somebody who needs a lot of structure and likes homework assignments. And I've met those adults and I'm like, wait, you like homework? Okay, sure. But you know, like also the biggest thing that a lot of people don't think about is if you have insurance and maybe you find a therapist but they don't take your insurance, talk to them about if they offer sliding scale. Ask how they can work with you. Because even therapists who don't necessarily, you know, advertise it might have a sliding scale option or might know other people that are like them that they can refer to.
I know the primary therapist that I've worked with in the past was I found them through a friend's recommendation. You know, I had a friend who I respected in the field of therapy, and I wasn't able to see them, but you know, I kind of said, you know, I'm looking for somebody like you. Who can you recommend? And they were able to. They gave me two suggestions at that particular point in time, and ended up one of those two was a really good fit for me. So ask for recommendations, or you know, even if you can't necessarily go to that person, be like, hey, do you know someone who might be a good fit? So that is a good way to hunt down recommendations and get started. So that brings us to the end of all of the interview questions, but I just want to say really quick, thank you both for joining me today and being willing to come on my channel and talk about nerdy stuff and talk about mental health stuff. And thank you all for what you do. I have a great deal of respect for your line of work and for the service that you provide. And also, thank you for letting me talk about this weird intersection of two different parts of my life. So, but really quick, I'm gonna let you both, I guess, pitch where you work and what you do again. And to anyone who is watching this video, I will have links to both Garreth and Julia's practices, or whatever the right word is there. I'm sorry if I messed that up. But I'll have links to their stuff in the video description. So if you are in Texas and want to check them out personally, you can do that. Julia, one more time, tell us where people can find you and the stuff that you do.
Yeah, so almost all of my handles on social media are just my first name and my last name, so Julia Stamman. You can look up the spelling and the links. And that's just my website as well. And my private practice is called Heart of the Realm, and I'm in Austin, Texas.
Right. And Garreth?
And then, you know, Garreth, that's a really unique name already. So if you Google Garreth Baldwin, you're probably going to find me. But my website is Roll for Growth, ROLL, because I am the math-minded person in my group. And, you know, you can find me there. You can find me on social media. I'm in Dallas, Texas. I'm also going to try and, at least when this video goes live, be really interactive in the comments if y'all have questions, so I can at least point commenters in the right directions.
Well, Garreth and Julia, thank you again. I really appreciate you all. I had a ton of fun with this. And to everyone who is watching the video, thank you for being here as well. And thank you for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.